How do you feel this morning, my friend? I cocked one eye open. The smudge-eyed monk peered down at me, his arms overflowing with bundled linen and wooden bowls. Plastered walls hung with strips of green-dyed cloth rose up behind him to a timbered roof, and an array of narrow windows, paned with horn, admitted murky light. A smoking rushlight clamped to an iron tripod revealed 10 more beds lined up neatly in the long, plain room. From my odd vantage, I lay on my left side, some kind of bolster propping me up from the back, and legs tipped higher than my head. The beds appeared unoccupied. "I feel like Iroh's wrath," I said. Every particle of my flesh felt battered. My leg throbbed as if the arrow point were grinding its way into the bone. My shoulder might have had rats chewing on it. Damp all over, I shivered helplessly despite a pile of blankets. I had known better than to pull the damnable arrow out of my thigh when I had no help but Boreas, who was convinced that burying a live cat under an oak at the full moon would cure his crabs, and that spitting over a bridge rampart while wearing a moonbird's feather would speed the healing of his broken hand. I knew little of the body's humors, but one of a man's great veins lay in the thigh, and I'd seen men bleed to death faster than a frog takes a fly while removing an arrow point carelessly from just the same spot as my wound. And we hadn't been able to stop moving. When the Harrower priestess had thrown her legion of madmen against us, the battle had gone completely to the fiery pits, and 6,000 other bloodied soldiers who had wagered their fortunes on the wrong side in this cursed war were soon to be right on our heels. A half-wit would understand what the delay would cost me. Though I had weighed bleeding to death likely preferable to sepsis and amputation, in my way I had postponed the decision, figuring it was better to die tomorrow than today. Now the payment was falling due. Mustering my courage, I broached the question gnawing at my gut. "You'll take the leg, I know, brother. But think you will live to raise a glass again?" The monk dropped his bundled linens atop a wide chest pushed against the end wall of the infirmary, then began arranging the wooden bowls on shelves already crowded with ewers and basins, jars and bottles. "If the one God's mercy continues to hold sway, your leg will heal with no ill result. Your fever's broken just this morn. Young Julian will be certain for prayers are answered. You'd think the boy had delivered you from the gates of hell, bearing sword and shield like the archangel himself. But it's putrid, and when you remove the arrow, the nasty bit of iron is 2 days out, lad, and for certain you've the constitution of an ox. You're on the mend." The monk was a strapping fellow. Despite his circled eyes and his stubbled cheeks that drooped excess skin about his jaw, his face expressed naught but good cheer. He spread out an array of bundled plants on a long table that stood between the last bed and the stack of shelves. Perching his backside on a backless stool, he began picking leaves from the array. "I'm Brother Robbery, as it happens, by Iroh's grace, the infirmarian of Gilleraine Abbey." "Oh!" Astonishing how much better I felt straight away. As if I'd pulled the veil off my contracted bride and found some girl I loved. I dropped my head on the pillow and crowed like a banty rooster. "May the angels scribe your name, brother! The moment I'm afoot, I'll dance you a jig and carry you to heaven on my back." A stoop-shouldered monk with piebald hair and a gray scapular over his cinched black gown scuttered out from behind me, casting a mildly shocked glance my way. The steaming crock he carried past my bed to the table left a scented trail in the air. Chicken. Holy Mother, could it be? And onions and carrots and thyme and savory. My stomach rumbled uproariously. Months had passed since I last tasted meat. In early summer, Boreas and I had shot an aged squirrel, 3 bites apiece, and broth from the boiled bones with little more than grass to throw in it. Then and since the Ardren legions had been squatting on land long raided, gleaned, and stripped. We'd had only bread like dried leather made from shriveled peas or even acorns ground into flour. And never enough. No planting or harvest this year in any of the western Ardra. The summer campaign had been only one of Prince Perrin's gross miscalculations in pursuing his father's throne. Not even the worst. "Thank you, Brother Anselm," said Robbery. "I do believe our patient's going to appreciate the soup today. Inform the abbot that our supplicant is awake, if you would." Piebald Brother Anselm nodded solemnly to the infirmarian and scurried away. To my delight, Brother Robbery put aside his activities and selected a wooden bowl from the shelf. I almost moaned as he filled the bowl from the tureen, acquired a spoon, and dragged a low stool to my bedside. The good brother insisted I drink some concoction that tasted like boiled scrappings from a stable floor first of all. But after the first spoonful of the soup, I would have knelt to kiss the hairy toes that peeked out from his sandals, had he but asked. "Abbot Louviar has been most concerned about you," he said, as I reveled in the savory broth and tiny bits of succulent poultry deemed suitable for an invalid. "He's had prayers said, asked blessings as we sit at the table. He'll be in to see you now I've sent word you're awake," I said, holding the last warm spoonful in my mouth before I let it trickle down my throat. "Iroh's holy angels, all of you. I was feeling quite devout. He grinned, an expression distinctly odd for a badger. I'll get you more. I had never shared Boreas's horror of monks, but then I had never been fool enough to creep over a priory wall with the bursar's coffer on my back. Boreas had been sentenced to the loss of one hand, a flogging, and a week in pillory, but managed to escape before suffering any of the three. Now he was convinced that every monk and lay brother passed his description about the realm, tucked in sleeves or under scapulars, and that every abbot and prior was determined to hang him. Sadly, my own direst peril had less to do with law-breaking or sin than with birth and blood, circumstances for which no sanctuary could be granted. But I had no reason to believe that my loathsome family or the pure-blood registry could find me here or anywhere. I'd shed them both at 15 and had long since drowned myself in a sea of anonymity. I had no intention of bobbing to the surface. Ever. 2 more bowls of the brothers' heaven-kissed soup, and I took even the changing of the dressing on my thigh with good humor. Warm, fed, and clean. Indeed, someone had washed me head to toe while I slept. And out of the weather, and no one coming after me with arrows, pikes, lances, or hands outstretched for money. Perhaps the boy Julian was indeed the archangel who guarded the gates of paradise. The truest wonder was that he had let me in. I fell asleep as promptly as a cat in a sunbeam. When my eyes drifted open again some time later, a long-limbed man of more than middling years sat on the stool at my bedside. A golden solitaire dangled from his neck. The sunburst symbol of Iroh's glory worked in a pendant so heavy it must surely be an abbot's ensign. Instead of affecting a modest tonsure like the infirmarians, he had shaved his head entirely clean. Holding in mind my present comforts, I bowed my head and shaped my greeting in the Karish manner. In the name of Holy Iroh and his saints, my humblest gratitude be yours, Holy Father. Truly the one God led my wayward footsteps to this refuge when the world and all its ways had failed me. I didn't think it too grovelish. Iroh commands us offer his hand in charity, said the abbot, and so we have done. It remains to be seen what he has in mind for you. His full-shaven pate, fine arched nose, and narrow, pot-grooved face made his cool gray eyes seem very large. I squirmed a bit, suddenly feeling even more naked than I already was under my lovely blankets. A younger monk, full-shaven as well, but with unmarked eyes and dark brows that made a solid line above deep-set eyes, stood a few steps behind the abbot, hands tucked piously under his black scapular. Though his expression remained properly sober, his brow lifted slightly, and his mouth quickened with amusement as he observed me under the abbot's eye. "What is your name, my son?" The abbot took no note of his attendant's improper levity. "Valen, Holy Father." "Valen. Nothing else, then?" "Nay, Holy Father. No title to mark me as nobility or clergy, no town or profession to mark me as a rooted man, even if my father was unimportant. No association with any of the 3 provinces of Naron, Ardra, Morian, or Evanor, or with their contentious princes. And certainly no collineal surname to proclaim my family pure blood, and thus my future beyond even an abbot's right to determine. Especially not that. Just Valen. Valen Militius, perhaps. Another dangerous topic. The young attendant monk's dark brows lifted slightly. Attentive. At the work table, Brother Robert's head was bent over his mortar and pestle, plants and vials, but his hands grew still. Though I tried to dip my own head farther, being propped on my side made it difficult. Not a professional soldier, Holy Father, far from it, nor even a worthy freeman-at-arms. But I once carried a pike for King Eodward, Iroh cherishes soul, and stood behind him as he drove the Hansker barbarians back across the sea. He called us his men of light, and so we all felt more than what we were born. All true, and now the test would come. And one of noble Eodward's sons. He touched the clean linen that wrapped my shoulder and made a blessing sign on it. My flesh warmed beneath the bandage. Which of the 3 princes owns your fealty, or do you hope for this ghostly pretender of current rumor? None of them, Holy Father. Though the sign of 3 speaks of heaven, these 3 sons are so far from worthy of their kingly father that an ignorant lout such as I am cannot choose. And though I reverence any issue of good King Eodward, I fear that naught but tavern gossip has delivered him a 4th son. Unless I could discover with which prince this man's favor rested, I dare not say more. Perrin of Ardra, whom I had chosen as being the most intelligent and least openly brutal of the half-brothers, was surely dead by now, or in chains, battling his plans and the names of his noble supporters to his brother Bayard's torturers. In either case, my oath to him was moot. He had shown himself mean and so stubbornly inept that my loyalty had been ruined much earlier. He certainly was not worth dying for. I glanced up. The gray eyes held steady, the long, slender bones of the abbot's face unmoved. So your wounds were not earned in battle, then? Well, the battle had been over months before we'd charged Prince Bayard's line at Rolling. In the spring, when Bayard of Morian had allied with Scylla Diaglu and her harrowers. But such quibbling wouldn't carry weight with this abbot, not with a wound in my back and the ambition requiring me to declare not only that I had run away, but which side I had deserted. I needed a better story. Nay, Holy Father, rather my wounds stem from a private dispute with another man regarding property that belonged to me. Though right was with me in the matter, I believed I was going to die, and so confessed my sins to a village proctor. He sent me on the road with my wounds untended as penance, saying the one God would put me in the way of death or life as was his will. I held still and listened carefully, fighting the urge to add more words to this collection of nonsense, such as what village I'd come from or why I had suffered the strikes of arrows rather than knife or club. It seemed a very long time until the abbot spoke again. Was this by chance the disputed property, Valen? The dark-browed monk stepped forward, pulled a book out of his black gown, and passed it to the abbot. The abbot laid it on the bed in front of my face, a squarish book some 3 fingers thick, its brown leather binding tooled in gold with griffins and dragons, long-limbed angels, roundels, vine leaves, and every flourish of the leather gilder's art. Slightly damp at one corner, but I quickly verified that the dampness had not touched the fine vellum pages enough to damage them or smear the ink. If so, and if you have any idea of what you carry and can tell me how you've come by it, then I may believe your story. I swallowed, puffed out a strong breath, and touched my finger to the golden letters on its cover and the familiar sigil of a griffin carrying a rolled map in its claws. Of course, Holy Father. This is the original volume of Maps of the Known World, created by the pureblood Jonas de Cartamandua, Magistoria, the most famous cartographer in all of Navron's history. That part was true, of course. My mind raced. It was given me 7 years ago, when with Iro's grace my service, scouting, preserved the Mardrain Lovo-Riles troop from capture by the Hansker. Knowing a scout would understand its worth, his lordship said it was fitting recompense for the lives I had saved. One of these wild harrowers tried to take it. They think to burn all books, you know. So you are familiar with the book, studied it, no doubt, used its guiding spells when you served the Mardain? Monks valued books. New initiates often brought them, and the Karish would certainly want this one. Legend said it could lead men to the realm of angels. Of course, Holy Father. I used it often in the Mardain service. I treasure each page. Though my valuing had more to do with the gold coins of pawnbrokers than the gold crowns of angels. The gray-eyed abbot nodded. I'll accept this tale for now. Brother Robbery is scowling, for I promised not to tire you. Tell me, Valen, what do you ask of Gilrain Abbey beyond your fortnight of sanctuary? This answer was much easier than the previous ones, requiring no instant work of the imagination. To join your holy fraternity, Holy Father. To repent my licentious life and serve the god Iro if I may. That is, to eat and stay warm, dry, and anonymous until I decided where to go and what to do next to reverie of fortune that seemed to have reached its nadir. Soldering, the only work I'd found in 2 years, had decidedly lost its attractions. Granted, said the abbot with astonishing speed. Brother Sebastian will be your mentor, instructing and guiding you in our rule and custom. Brother Gildas, you will inform Sebastian and Prior Nemecio of our new aspirant. The dark-browed monk bowed respectfully from the hip. Once prayers and blessings had ushered the 2 of them out, Brother Robbery appeared at my side, bearing a clay jar into which I took a grateful piss. He then passed the jar onto the piebald Brother Anselm, who settled at the work table and began to dip and pour and examine my output as if it were the waters of the heavenly rivers. I recited my stories over and over in my head, so I'd not forget them if questioned again. After a while, the infirmarian provided me with a thick posset, not so savory as the chicken, but sweet, warm, and filling. Setting the empty mug aside, Robbery reached his hand toward the book that still lay on the bed with me, hesitating. May I? Eyelids heavy, I smiled. For thou, blessed angel of the infirmary, anything. He chuckled, lifted the book from the bed, and ran his thick fingers lovingly over the binding. Cartamandua Book of Maps. To have such a thing come to Gilderrain. You will be besieged with pleas to see it. Few of our brothers, even those who labor in the scriptorium, will have glimpsed so rare and precious a work, or one so storied. The very book that led to the Sindure and the Hierarch to discover young Eodward in the realm of angels, the book that shows the hidden places of the world. Who would have thought that one like you would possess a sorcerer's finest... I'm sorry. His sagging cheeks flushed in kind embarrassment. You're not the first, good brother, not the first. Strange roads indeed. Until 5 days ago, when I discovered the book in a deserted manse I happened to be looting as I ran away from a battle I'd sworn to fight, I'd last touched it 11 years before at a bookshop in Palmanor. I'd been desperate for money, a state less familiar then than now. I'd had to settle for less than its full worth because the book pawnter refused to believe I'd come by it honestly. Neither the good brother Robbery nor the pawnter would believe, nor would I ever tell anyone could I avoid it, that old Janus de Cartamandua himself had given it to me, his ill-behaved and unappreciative grandson, on my tumultuous and unpleasant 7th birthday. My parents had been furious.